Our next presentation is called Compassion Fatigue When Helping Hurts, is being presented by Christy Bartlett, licensed medical social worker, and Allison Morgan, a licensed clinical social worker. Christy Bartlett received both her Bachelor's of Sciences and Master's of Science in Social Work from WT. After beginning her career in the secretarial field, she's worked at Bivens Memorial Nursing Home and developed a passion for working with the elderly and advocating for those who cannot speak for themselves. She's also worked at Gentava Hospice and assisted patients and families who required hospice services. She is currently the undergraduate social work program director in the College of Education and Social Sciences at WT. Allison Morgan, the licensed clinical social worker, she also received her bachelor's and master's degrees from WT. She's worked as a private practitioner, an adoption counselor at Adoption Choices of Texas, and as a volunteer supervisor with the Amarillo area CASA, and in hospice settings, the most recent being the intake hospital setting, being an intake coordinator at the Pavilion. She recently joined the College of Education and Social Sciences as an instructor of social work, and she's currently working toward her doctorate of social work through Simmons University. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tommy. Welcome. It's so exciting to see all of the people here today. I'm showing 128 attendees. That is absolutely amazing. So I hope to share some information with you guys. Let me get my presentation up. So what I'm going to talk about is compassion fatigue when helping hurts, because all of you are in some sort of field to where you are going to be dealing with people's traumas, whatever they have going on, crisis situations, and things like that. So I'll start off with, what is compassion fatigue? So compassion fatigue can be, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary says it's a physical and mental exhaustion and emotional withdrawal experienced by those who care for sick, traumatized people over an extended period of time. I've also heard of it being called the cost of caring. We care a lot about our individuals that we deal with, and we don't want to get to a point to where we don't care anymore. And it's never intentional. It just kind of seems to happen. As social workers, we are taught to empathize. And Chelsea had kind of got into, the definition of empathy, where it's feeling what they feel, but we're also told that we can't feel so much that we're taking it home and we're bringing all that trauma home. And so with that definition, I'd like to come up with my first polling questions to kind of give you guys some interaction and kind of see where everybody's at when it comes to where they feel like the compassion fatigue is. I'll give you about 30 seconds. So have you ever experienced compassion fatigue? So it's yes, no, or I'm not sure. And we're going to get in more detail about compassion fatigue. So if you don't know, it's fine to go ahead and put I'm not sure. Lots of people answering. So majority so far are saying yes. Some no, and some I'm not sure yet. And so I'm going to end the polling. I'm going to share the results. So majority said, 84% of you said yes, you have had some sort of experience with some sort of compassion fatigue. And we're going to go over some things, some things that come about with compassion fatigue, how you can tell, some signs. And then my colleague Allison is going to kind of dig into some things to do about it. But a majority of you chose yes, and that's pretty typical in the fields that we're in. What I have included is what's called a ProQual test, a professional quality of life measure. There are a lot of tests out there to kind of see where you're at. I don't typically say prefer one over the other. I think a lot of these are more just about self-awareness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the test itself. We're going to talk briefly about it. You're not going to do it today, but I encourage you to do it. It will be in the handouts that you guys will have access to. So when you help people, you have direct contact with their lives. As you may have found, your compassion for those you help can affect you in a positive and negative ways. So there's some questions on here, and I want you to, if you decide to do this, I want you to think about the last 30 days, not necessarily today or tomorrow, because as you all know, we have good days and we have bad days. So if you take this test on a day where you had a really bad day, had some, saw a lot of things that really stressed you out, it's not going to come out as accurate over if you take the overall last 30 days. So questions like, I am happy, I feel connected to others, I feel trapped by my job, those types of things. And then I want to talk a little bit about the scoring. The second page goes over kind of something that we're going to talk about in just a minute, which is kind of your score and kind of where you're at. If you score this, you're kind of in this area. So I want to go to the last page and kind of just tell you how to score it. So the first part is your compassion satisfaction scale, and we'll talk about what that exactly means and what score you get and kind of what you need to kind of evaluate yourself and look at those things. You're going to take the answer to these questions here and total them out. The burnout scale is a little bit different because the test is put kind of in a positive way in order to not skew your results. Some of these answers you're going to have to do backwards. So if you answer for number 1, if you answer 5, you need to change it to, or if you answer 1, you need to change it to 5. And I don't know why the 1 didn't show up there. I apologize for that. If you, for number 4, if you answer 3, you're going to put 3. And same like 15, 17, 29, anyone that starts. So if you answer 5 on number 29, you're going to put 1. And so it has little equals by here, so you know kind of what to do. And then the last section, secondary traumatic stress scale, those are just, you just input the numbers and total them up. So now that you've seen that, I want to kind of go and just talk a little bit about the test itself. I will also, at the end of the presentation, after Allison does her portion, I'm going to give you guys some resources. And one of these resources includes an app, and in this test is actually in the app. So if you don't want to score it yourself, you can go through it through the app. And you can do it, I think, like every 20 days to see if that changes and see where you're at. So if you don't want to go through and do the test yourself, if you're more like me where you want to have them calculate it, because I am definitely not a math major, then I would suggest using that app. So again, it breaks it down to 3 sections: compassion, satisfaction, secondary traumatic stress, and burnout. So compassion satisfaction is about the pleasure you derive from being able to do your work well. So you may feel like it's a pleasure to have others through your work. You may feel positive about your colleagues, your ability to contribute to work settings, or even the greater good of society. In this area, the higher range, the better. Less than 23 means that you may have some problems with your job, or you may get more satisfaction from other activities such as your family life, going on vacation, taking time off, things like that, that your compassion doesn't derive directly from your work, and that's not where it's scoring from. So if it's below 23, you want the higher the better. So if it's below 23, maybe it's just not your job. Maybe you've got something in your life going on too. So you kind of need to balance that out and look at those things. Keep in mind the answers will change over time. It'll change with the seasons in your life. It'll change with what you're exposed to at work and what you're not exposed to. What I always try to tell people is think about where you're at now versus when you started. Most of you are in a job that you wanted to do, hopefully, whether it be in law enforcement or working with youth or caregiving or something like that, something that you really took joy out of when you first did. Look at it then and then look at it now and kind of see where you're at. If you see now that you don't enjoy it as much, well, why are you not enjoying it as much? Is it because of the restrictions that have come? Is it regulations? Is it, the times? Is it, crisis situations, those types of things? So take a look. Once you do that compassion satisfaction score, kind of look at it. And like I said, the higher range in this area is the better. Now we're going to go to secondary traumatic stress. So secondary traumatic stress is about your work-related secondary exposure to extremely or traumatically stressful events. So developing problems due to exposure to others' trauma, which is what all of us do, right, is somewhat rare, but it does happen to many people who care for those who have experienced extremely or traumatic stressful events. And I kind of disagree with this portion of it a little bit. This is taken directly off the the test, the ProQual test. I think all of us in the fields that we're in, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to know more about it and have it. And obviously, most of you said that you've had some sort of compassion fatigue at some point in time, just by the poll I did. So I would say, you know, I think we do develop some of those things. We do take things home. It's really hard to cut that off. So I kind of want to talk about first about what is considered a traumatic event. What do you consider a traumatic event? We all have different ways we handle things. So the traumatic events to me may not be the same traumatic events to you, but some that I can think of are natural disasters, deaths, violence, either being there when it happened or the aftermath of it and being there helping afterwards. I consider high caseload can be, you know, part of you know, a traumatic event sometimes, especially during the pandemic, accidents, things like that. So again, it's not for me to decide what you think is traumatic. It's individualized. So keep those things in mind. So the symptoms of STS, which is secondary traumatic stress, are usually rapid in onset and associated with a particular event. So they may include being afraid of something, not sleeping very well, waking up with like nightmares, things like that. Being afraid, having things pop into your mind, like you're just going to your normal day-to-day stress and these things just pop into your mind, or some other things that remind you of the event where it comes back and these emotions come back. If you're greater than 41 in this area, you need to take some time to think about what at work may be frightening you, if it is at work, or if it's something personal, but somewhere in your life, you have some sort of secondary traumatic stress that's making you get a score over 41. Or if there's some other reason, like I said, that this is elevated. A higher score, I just kind of want to put this in there too, doesn't mean you have a problem. It doesn't mean that you're on the brink of breaking. What it means that maybe you just need to evaluate and reflect on it. And I just think that's important to say, because I think being able to evaluate and reflect, it's not just, you hear the word cookie cutter in social work a lot. It's not just, oh, you have this score, you have this problem. It's more of, okay, I have this score. Why do I have this score? And individually think about it. So some things you can do is discuss it with your supervisor, colleague, you know, your support system, another healthcare professional, because a lot of us in the helping profession have counselors and go see, you know, clinical social workers and things like that, and get therapy ourselves. And then also, I kind of want to put in this area, take time off. I know a lot of people with the pandemic have not been able to take a lot of time off. Travel has been restricted, and that causes a lot more stress. We need that time off. We need that break with those boundaries with our work to be able to have that break and rejuvenate ourselves. So that is secondary traumatic stress. I want to talk about burnout next. That's just the last section. From research perspective, burnout is one of the elements of compassion fatigue. It's you have feelings of helplessness, difficulties in dealing with work or in doing your job effectively. Negative feelings usually have a gradual onset, so sometimes you don't realize you're doing it. That's why it's also really good to have a friend or colleague that says, hey, are you okay lately? Because I noticed something's going on. You're just not quite yourself. They can reflect the feeling that your efforts make no difference, or they can be associated with a very high workload and or a non-supportive work environment, which happens a lot of times with restrictions on funding and things like that. If you are lower than 23 in the burnout area, it probably reflects feelings about your ability to be effective in your work. So you're able to do it okay and efficiently at whatever time you took the test. Again, this can change. If you're greater than 41, you probably want to evaluate what makes you feel like you're not effective. Do you not have the resources you need? Is it because, you know, maybe you have a lot of life events that's interfering with your work, those types of things. The score may be reflected by mood, so keep that in mind. Again, don't take it when you're in a really bad mood. We're not always on our A game, and that's just the reality of it. So as with anything, try to answer as if it was in the last 30 days. Again, as a whole, the last 30 days. So that is a ProQual test. I'm going to go over some signs of compassion fatigue with you. And these are just a few that I pulled out. There are a lot more. Everybody's body reacts differently to stress. So exhaustion, and that can be physically or mentally exhausted, or both. Irritability, maybe things are irritating you more than what they did before. Maybe your toddler spilling something makes you really angry, whereas before you know it probably wasn't your toddler's fault. I mean, they didn't mean to do it. Sleeping issues, either sleeping too much or too little. And when it comes to extremes like too much or too little, usually if you get to those extremes, that's too much. That's when it kind of turns into a negative. I always think of it as like, if you need to indulge in a sweet, you can have a piece of cake, but don't eat the whole cake, because that's probably not very healthy for you. Then on to weight fluctuation, either losing weight without trying or gaining some weight. Headaches, and we all live in the panhandle and deal with sinuses and allergies. I think most all of us are in the panhandle at least. So it's more of a tension headache. They say that's kind of where it's wrapped around, or kind of on both sides. So if you're having more of those, it's probably related to the stress. Poor job satisfaction. What I think about this, and when I've had a job before that I was really unsatisfied in, I just remember I worked Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. That's when it was my normal job hours, and not in working in the helping profession, where you kind of have some odd hours sometimes. But I remember Sunday night thinking, oh, I got to go to work tomorrow, and just feeling icky and getting in a bad mood. And that's when you really can evaluate, oh, maybe it is my job. Maybe I need to do something for myself. I need to make a change, those types of things. Isolating yourself. I am all one who likes my time to myself, but if I do it to where it's interfering with my family, my friends, my day-to-day routine, that's when you know it's become an issue. Concentration issue, maybe forgetting things that you've never forgotten before, not being able to focus, not being able to come up with the right words, those types of things. Feeling overwhelmed, like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. Being very anxious, and that's just getting those feelings in your stomach and just not feeling well. Having a detachment, and when you start having that detachment from your family and your friends, that's not healthy. So we really don't want that to happen to you. If you start noticing that, or if your family and friends start noticing that, it's time to evaluate it. Mood shifting, one extreme to the other. Becoming pessimistic, whereas you probably weren't pessimistic before, if that's a change. Addiction, and addiction can be anything from addicting to a certain thing or addicting to like a substance. And again, those things will interfere with your personal life. Muscle tension, especially in the neck and the back area, and that could also help out with the headaches. Loss of productivity, if you're not getting as much done as you used to. Depression, and hopelessness, like there's nothing I'm going to do that's going to make a change. I'm just doing this and nothing is happening. I'm not helping anything. So, and we'll get to some questions. I think I saw some chats out there. So we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. But I do want to put up another poll. This will be the last poll from me. Now that you've seen the signs of compassion fatigue, I want to know how many days a week you go home mentally and or physically exhausted. 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or every day. I'll give you guys a few minutes. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about, the stress curve. In just a minute, we're going to segue into that. So, a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to end that now. And I'm going to share the results with you guys. So how many days do you get? 0 days. I had a couple of people put that. That's great. I want to know what your secret is. 1 to 2 days, and that is pretty typical just by talking to my colleagues and being in the field. I can relate to that when I was in the field more. 3 to 4 days is the most popular, which still is a majority of the week. And if you're going home mentally or physically exhausted, what is the consequence of that? Is it your family, things like that? 5 to 6 days, and then every day. And those that put, 5 to 6 days every day, we probably need to kind of look at, you need to evaluate why are you mentally and physically exhausted? Is it work? What can I do to change? Can I get some self-care in, things like that? And Allison's going to go over some stuff with us so we can help out with that. So thank you for sharing, everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about the stress curve. So York Dodson created this stress curve. He did this test. I believe he used mice. So a question I have for you, and it's not a polling question, is all stress bad stress? So think about it. Is all stress bad stress? Every stress that you have in your life, when you have no stress at all versus when you have a little bit of stress versus when you have no stress. So I'm going to show you the stress curve itself. Here's your performance. And so this is the results of it. And here's your stress level, okay? So you see your performance here. If there's no stress, you're kind of inactive and bored. Having no stress is not good in regards to your performance for most. We have a lack of motivation and a lack of challenge. So we need something, especially those people who are really competitive. They need something to be at peak performance. If there is no challenge and there's no stress in their lives, then they're probably not going to have peak performance within their job. And then you kind of move a little bit more to healthy tension, motivated, focused. And then they say you're kind of in the peak performance in this area here. And that's moderate. This is optimal. This is kind of where you want to be. You want to have that medium where it's not too much and not too little. Remember, I said extremes kind of turn into negativity if you have one extreme or the other. So your performance enhancing, you have that extra push to get things done. And then you get over here and you start getting tired. And that's where a lot of you guys, I think, are at, especially those going home every day of the week feeling mentally, physically exhausted. Panic, anxiety, burnout, and breakdown, and stress overload. And when you have that stress overload, stress can do such amazing things to your body in a negative way. It can, health-wise, I know, like if I'm really stressed out and then the event, like if I'm in a stressful event, the event's over, and it's like my body will sometimes shut down and I'll end up being sick. My immune system goes down. So we don't want you to get to this portion over here where you're in that burnout, breakout stress, breakdown area, because that high stress level can lead to that. You don't want that at that unimaginable level. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison now and have her kind of go over some stuff, and then we'll talk about some resources in just a minute.
Thank you. Okay, so let me get this pulled up. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about this, especially since I just received all that feedback that we are struggling in this area. So let's get started. In the book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, Stories That Heal, Dr. Rachel Remen notes, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. I think this is a poignant statement and leads us into our work today. So we have thus far talked a lot about trauma and a lot about compassion fatigue, but I want to kind of review a little bit. So compassion fatigue is often lumped together with secondary trauma and vicarious victimization. Secondary traumatic stress mimics post-traumatic stress disorder as it develops through the discussion and treatment in a client encounter. Compassion fatigue is the result, and like Christy said, the cost of caring for traumatizing populations. Research conducted on secondary traumatic stress actually shows that the prevalence of compassion fatigue and those related conditions varies from rates to from 8% to about 16% amongst graduate students, social workers working in diverse fields, all the way to over half of clinicians treating trauma survivors. And despite this knowledge and research, there's actually limited interventions specifically designed to address these conditions. So today, we are going to be talking about a clinical practice and supervision model that discusses how interactions can occur in ways that can be protective against the development of compassion fatigue. And that is the components for enhancing clinician experience and reducing trauma, or the C-Cert model. So the C-Cert model was actually developed by Dr. Brian Miller. It's predicated on the belief that the level of job distress experience can be reduced by affecting the emotional state of the practitioner. It's proposed that by intentionally, and that's the key word, using the skills provided to maintain emotional regulation during trauma treatment, one will not experience the same level of depletion and compassion fatigue as others who lack these skills. So our presentation today is a very general overview of this model, and I highly recommend that if you guys are able to attend a training on this, that you go. I went to one and it was like half day, and he was like, we're still not going to touch everything. So it's a great training. So compassion fatigue or secondary trauma is actually not caused by exposure to difficult situations. It's actually our response and how we react to those situations. So I bet a lot of you have had numerous conversations about self-care. You've attended conferences. If you're in social work, you've written, I don't even know how many journals on the subject, but does self-care actually work? That's the tricky question. So are we able to take long baths and actually meditate our way out of burnout or out of fatigue? I can't see your faces, but I am pretty sure that you guys are like, amen, like that is so true. It's honestly invalidating to the experience of us to suggest that self-soothing strategies like those will help resolve high levels of dysregulation. So we are going to talk about the 5 domains that represent the C-Cert model. The first one, experiential engagement, and then decreasing or reducing rumination, conscious narrative, and reducing emotional labor, and then parasympathetic recovery. So the idea for all of this is to have conscious oversight, and that is intentionally using these skills and developing them. If we're not intentionally doing it, it's not going to work. It's just going to be like self-care. So the first domain that we're going to discuss is experiential engagement. The helping profession maintains a popular wisdom that over-engagement or caring too much for our clients is the root cause of compassion fatigue. It's important to note, though, that research shows that highly engaged practitioners report that empathetic engagement is protective and energizing. Human service workers who experience higher levels of empathy have higher job satisfaction and longer job tenure than those who actually disengage or avoid. So helpers who use avoidance strategies are actually more at risk for secondary trauma. They're unable to, what I like to call, sit in the stink, and that's using a good word. Trauma work is intense. Experiencing empathy, being all in with our clients is a lot. It can provoke feelings of sadness, anxiety, fear, anger, frustration. I can remember one of the more traumatic clients that I worked with. She was retelling her story of how her mom actually died in her arms. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I cannot see my next client. This is too much. I had to step out of the office, cry, and then walk around the building. And I was like, this just isn't working. Like, what can I do in the moment to make things better? The thing is, though, that these feelings are uncomfortable, but they're not harmful, and feelings do not cause fatigue. So experiential engagement is the willing to be all in, or the I got this concept. There's a reason all of us on here are in the helping profession. We're choosing to do this work. And usually it's because we have a set of skills that are going to set us up for success. As professional helpers, we need to have a willingness to engage in those unpleasant and stressful events. So what do you tell yourself, or what do others tell you when you have a hard day? It might be, oh, it's Friday Eve, don't worry about it, the weekend's tomorrow. Or tomorrow's another day. Or, hey, at least you didn't have to deal with so-and-so client today. What if we went to a therapist for those same symptoms, burnout, told them we're really struggling and we're feeling the effects, and they just told us, well, maybe you should journal, or maybe you should just take a long weekend. We would leave that office wondering, one, why we paid $100 for that information, and two, we'd probably never return. So our goal is to open up to the full experience and know that what we're feeling can be experienced without causing actual damage. Our emotions, again, are not traumatizing. They're actually fleeting, and we'll discuss fleeting emotions later. But the actual trauma we encounter is from feeling overwhelmed, helpless, and powerless. So let's talk about the skills associated with experiential engagement. What we want to do is set our intention. Again, we want to tell ourselves, you know what, I've got this, and ask ourselves, how are we doing? For me, it's having those positive affirmation cards around my desk. For other people, it might be putting a sticky note up somewhere in your office. It's just a reminder to check in. Ask yourself, how am I feeling? Are you noticing that your tummy's in knots? Well, why is it in knots? Maybe you have to deal with a client later on and you are just not looking forward to it. Remember, our emotions rise and fall. Again, do not react. We often do things that reinforce that we cannot do this work. It's all in our behavior and the messages we give ourselves about a certain event. So I want you guys to think of what is the most off-putting part of your role or of your job. How do you delay or avoid that part of your job? Do you wait until 4:45 to call someone, cross your fingers, and pray to the phone gods that they will not answer? Because I know I did that a lot. I was like, please let me get voicemail. Please let me get voicemail. What about those feelings that are associated with that? It's usually anxiety, you have some fear, something. But when we put things off, when we avoid them, we tend to make it worse, and we don't even think about that. If we would have just engaged fully in that phone call, it would have been over before we knew it, and we would have been fine and on to the next thing. All right, so our second domain is decreasing or regulating rumination. So some social service workers are very affected by trauma work. The thoughts of the described trauma may follow them long after the event, long after their client leaves the office. They might be 5 more people in, deep, and then they leave work and they're still thinking about that one client. This is where we often tell our professionals to leave work at work. Kind of like Christy said, this is not productive though, and we can't really do that. We can't just leave our work at work. So what if you had a great day? It was a productive day. It was an amazing day. Do we not go home and talk about it? We talk about our achievements. So what we need to do is learn to effectively communicate the bad stuff as well and feel it, not just avoid it. A lot of us find ourselves in constant rumination, especially if we're not immediately engaged in a focused task. Our minds wander, and this neurological state is referred to the default mode network. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So we all have one. We think of it as daydreaming, checking out. The best way for me to describe it is, have you ever been in a car, you end up at work and you're like, how in the heck did I get here? That is our default mode network. Usually during this time we drift. We're thinking of things that we need to do, we could have done better. If you're like me, you think in the shower at night about a comeback hours earlier. We're constantly thinking. So actually 2/3 of our time is in this mode. We are focusing on worry or dread. Rumination, even done with the intent of venting, because I know we all do it, is counterproductive. It inhibits empathy and the ability to problem solve. The idea of decreasing rumination is getting off that mental merry-go-round, actually ending that loop. So I want to go back to the idea that emotions are fleeting. If any of you guys have ever been thrown a surprise party, you probably walked in, they yelled surprise, and immediately you had that feeling of fear, but it quickly changed to excitement. That's what I mean by emotions are fleeting. It's actually the physiological state that sticks around. It's important that we calm down that physiological state in the moment, and that'll help us decrease arousal and dysregulation. So how do we handle rumination? What do? Well, first we need to acknowledge that we're ruminating. We need to be able to say, you know what, I'm doing this. I need to label the feelings and label the thoughts. Talk about what I'm experiencing. The next is focused engagement. Having activities that are goal-oriented. Engaging with others actually is known to end rumination. So just having those conversations. If you deal with rumination, especially at night, if you're anything like me, I find that keeping a notepad next to my bedside table is especially helpful. I am very big, my students know this, on doing to-do lists and being organized. And so I just kind of do a brain dump at night if I need to. All right, we're going to talk about conscious oversight, or I'm sorry, conscious narrative is the next thing. This is what I am saying to myself. So research conducted on narrative exposure therapy and PTSD notes that intense levels of distress demand verbalization. This actually activates the soothing circuits of the prefrontal cortex to calm our dysregulated limbic system. When an individual has an intense experience, there's a desire to describe it verbally. So think about a time that something happened to you that was really big. What did you want to do? You probably wanted to tell your family members, your spouse, somebody. You wanted to get that story about. We all have a story to tell about our experience. The story we tell ourselves about our work, what drives our purpose, and why we do this is paramount to feeling successful and overcoming the feelings of powerlessness and helplessness. So there are 3 parts to the conscious narrative. The first is the antecedent narrative. This is the before. So these are experiences that are shaped by the expectations we put on ourselves, both positive and negative. So what are you telling yourself before the event? What are you telling yourself on your drive to work? The second part is the concurrent narrative, what we're telling ourselves during the experience. Is it, I'm confident in my skills to manage this very difficult situation? Is it radical acceptance of the limits of what we can do? We need to make sure that we're talking positively about what we are in the midst of. And then finally, the third one is the consolidation narrative. It's what we say to ourselves after an intense experience. So we might reflect back and say, you know what, that experience was hard. It was painful, it was scary, or maybe it was fascinating, it was rewarding. Maybe I was able to provide myself some grace during that experience. It might be that you're able to reflect and say, you know what, like I'm handling that situation better than I ever have before, and I'm learning from it. The idea is to make sense of the story we're telling ourselves. The fourth domain is going to be reducing emotional labor. This is how we handle emotional vampires, the people who suck the energy from us. Emotional labor, is our ability to manage what we're feeling and how we show how we're feeling and present ourselves in a professional image. So if you've ever waited tables or you've been a customer service representative, you know the idea of emotional labor. It's that constant smiling. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. Let me get that for you. Have a great day. It's exhausting, right? It takes a lot of energy. In the C-Cert model, it's proposed by Dr. Miller that practitioners do not experience compassion fatigue because of too much engagement, but rather because we don't fully metabolize our emotional experience. The sources of emotional labor that depletes us is often caused by our actual suppression of our feelings. So suppression of frustration, suppression of anger, our history, maybe we've had some traumatic history, feelings of being overwhelmed by the intensity of our clients' experiences, or feelings of helplessness. It takes considerable energy when experiencing these emotions to communicate a message of confidence and a message of care. So what might be some sources of emotional labor in your work? It might be seeing our clients in very judgmental ways. Maybe they're not putting in the work. Maybe they're not doing what we're asking them to. Maybe we feel ineffective. And it might just be that when we feel like our feelings are fact. So if I feel that the situation is bad, it must be bad. We put too much into it. So in order to deal with emotional labor, we need to exhibit radical compassion. So what am I feeling? Maybe I don't need to get mad. Maybe I need to get curious. What's driving my behavior? Maybe we need to do a spiritual check-in. Talk to others about our feelings, listen to music, maybe actually volunteer our time to something else. Our last domain is going to be reducing parasympathetic recovery. And this is what most of us think about when we talk about self-care. These are the skills we develop and use to counteract fight, flight, and freeze. So these skills, again, are very intentional. We do not wait until we have a work-life balance, because let's say it, like, that's unrealistic. It's real-time self-care. So gaining emotional control in the moment. Recovery from this is going to include our daily go-tos. So maybe we check in with ourselves. We list what we've accomplished, list what we'll pick up on tomorrow. We don't do sad desk lunches, right? Like, we eat with our colleagues, or we at least get out of the building. We drive around, we take a walk, we do something. Maybe we meet up with a friend or a family member. You might have an end of the day transition, team support and connection. You know, Christy and I work together, and probably at least every Tuesday and Thursday, we get together in the morning and we talk. Like, she is my accountability partner. And we just talk about, like, how we're doing, how we're feeling, and, you know, our schedules. So now that we have talked about all of the domains, we're going to put it into practice. So you're going to be able to, you're going to get the handout, but I just want to go through this. And I hope that you guys will look at this handout and do it in real time, just so you can start practicing. Because again, these skills are intentional. So experiential engagement, I want you to commit to practicing one habit that will increase your awareness and express or accept your emotional experience during your work. So this might be monitoring your self-talk, your cynical
Allison,
humor. Yes.
I'm sorry. Why don't you go ahead and share your screen so they can see the handout?
I thought I was sharing my screen.
You were on a roll. We didn't want to interrupt you.
Guys.
Just scroll down to the menu and hit that green icon that says share screen.
It was shared on my end. Okay, can we see it now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the handout, you want to maybe monitor your self-talk, cynical humor, maybe it's observe your body language or meditate. And just think about also how you'll monitor, how you'll notice these things. So I might say, you know what, I'm going to not have such dark humor. Well, how am I going to make sure that I'm doing that? The second one is decreasing rumination. So 3 task positive activities you can do to actually get you out of your thoughts. This might be cleaning, baking, gardening, exercising, again, having an accountability partner, conversation, so forth. The third one is your conscious narrative. So on your way to work, what can you do to prepare for your professional role? It might be jamming out to some music, developing a mantra to start your day out with. What can you tell yourself to accept the intensity and distress that accompanies your work? Maybe you can tell yourself you've got this, you've worked your whole life and learned skills that will help you in the moment. And then finally, what can you tell yourself about why you serve trauma-impacted youth and families? The next one is reducing emotional labor. So how do you bring compassion and wholeheartedness into your work? Maybe it's learning and reframing difficult parts of your role as a skills challenge or a knowledge deficit. It might be establishing clearer boundaries, being all in on conversations. And then finally, I know that this work is hard and it might cause you to ask yourself if this is even what you want to do, but I implore that you do not visit this question on your worst day, but instead on your best day. Finally, parasympathetic recovery. So 2 mindfulness practices that you can incorporate into your daily routine. Again, this is at work, not after work, and not on the weekends. It might be taking an extra Friday off a couple times a year instead of one big vacation. It might be active reading. Christy provided you guys with the information on the ProQoL assessment. So this is a great place to start when figuring out your professional quality of life and maybe where adjustments are needed. So I just want you guys to remember that the C-Cert model is intentional and it requires practice implementing these skills. There's not going to be immediate recovery, but it definitely helps. So Christy's going to conclude our presentation resources and we'll answer questions at the end. You'll get my slides since I guess I didn't share it, so I apologize for that.
Okay, let me show you guys some resources and then we can really talk about some stuff. So like I said, there's also, I didn't include any support groups or anything like that in here, but there's a lot of those out there as well. So keep that in mind. There are a lot of virtual support groups. There were so many that I think they're so individualized that really you finding your own will probably be the best route. But I did want to find you guys share some of these apps that I feel like are really, some of them I really kind of liked. Some aren't for me, but I wanted to give a variety because not everybody thinks like I do. The first one I really kind of liked a lot. I actually downloaded it and have it on my phone now. It's Provider Resilience. It kind of gives you a snapshot of users' overall resilience rating generated through self-assessments. And so it'll have this scale of resilience rating. You can do the ProQual test, I think every 20 days on here. And I like how they don't let you do it every day because you want to kind of get an overall. You can't judge on how you're doing with just one day. It gives you a burnout scale. It gives you inspirational quotes. It has like a countdown to your next vacation. So it's really a pretty neat app. I tried to include the kind of the logo for all the apps so you know that's kind of what it was. I also, like I said, included these in a handout that you'll get when those handouts, whenever you get the link to find those handouts, it's all in on that sheet of paper to help you out if that's the way you want to do it. Way of Life is a habit tracker. We have good habits and we have some bad habits. This app helps you motivate you to build a better, stronger you. It tracks those daily routines, habits. It has a diary function, which a lot of people like to have a physical diary to write in. A lot of people, we are so kind of linked to our phone now that can do it there. I mean, I can do that in the middle of the night. I can do it, things like that. This helps pinpoint those positive and negative trends and where you might need to change some things. The next one's Calm. If you like to meditate and you feel like meditation is good, this is a really good app. You've probably seen the commercial on TV quite a bit. I have tried and tried and tried to meditate. My brain just won't shut off. I cannot get the meditation down. Maybe in a couple of years, I'll be able to get it down. So meditation is not my area, but like I said, you need to find out what works for you. What works for me more is like, oh, I have a vacation coming up, or that's a funny picture of a goat screaming or something like that. Meditation for me is really hard. I'm kind of like Allison. I'll be in the shower, I'll be laying in bed, and it's like all these minds and thought process comes through me. I think people that can meditate, they really enjoy it. And the fact that they have been able to do it is really impressive to me. Day One Journal is a journaling app, and I put a couple of journaling apps in here. I really think, like I said, some people like that tangible where they can write, but an actual journaling app is actually pretty cool because you can do unlimited entries on this one. It's got easy formatting. You can add pictures, which I think is cool, and you can go back to memories. This one allows you to do different journals. So you can do a daily journal, a gratitude journal, a workout journal, whatever journal you want, and you can add those and add to them kind of as you want to. So it's a pretty cool little resource if that's something you kind of want to do or want to dig into. If you're new at journaling and kind of like, I don't even know what do I say, what are my thoughts, this journey is one that gives you guided journaling coaching. Like it'll give you prompts on what to do. It'll ask you questions and you can journal on that. So this one's kind of like for new people who are kind of digging into it. Has a fitness tracker, it has a mood chart. And even if you don't do something like this, sometimes it is good to track your mood, saying, okay, I had a good day, had a bad day, things like that. Happy face, smiley face. So you can kind of evaluate where you're at. Has a self-care journal. Self-care is something that I was really good at preaching and not practicing. I've really had to work on that for myself and not feeling guilty about just taking a nap every now and then, things like that. So you can journal that and make sure you're doing it. This one also allows you to add pictures. So those are some of the apps. There's lots of them out there, and there will be more and more that come. Technology is amazing. We have all these new things coming out. I wanted to provide you guys some websites too. First Responders Toolkits. This helps manage self-care when helping others. It has daily tasks and self-care tips. It's got a compassion fatigue survey and a trauma risk survey. And I'll just go to it real quick so you guys can see it. And of course it has me in there. Some of these apps were created, like that provider resilience app was actually created for people who are in the military, but I really found it's pretty useful. But this one's pretty cool because it's got self-reflection, self-care tips. It's got the surveys. So if you didn't like the ProQual surveys, you can try this one. I wouldn't recommend just doing a survey until you get the answers you want. I recommend doing what's kind of makes more sense to you. So this one, it's actually pretty easy. This was created by the University of Minnesota. The next one is Psychology Today. So as we kind of mentioned, you know, we all need help sometimes, especially in the helping profession. So this is a good website, and all these links are on that page. If you want to find a therapist, you can just type in the city, the zip, or the name of the therapist here and find that contact information there. So it's really pretty cool. They also have a lot of different resources and things on there. So it's a pretty cool little website that you can go to. Compassion fatigue, this one is kind of geared more towards caregivers. And I know we had some questions before this started from caregivers. So this one is really a good one to kind of help out with that compassion fatigue. This one basically says you're not alone. And obviously by those surveys I did, we're not alone. A lot of people are feeling very similar. It's got webinars. It's got a caregiver bill of rights, which is the Bill of Rights. Basically, it says you have the right to be respected for the work you choose, to take pride in your work, you know, those types of things. So just kind of something to maybe remind you of things. It's got the 10 laws, and these 10 laws are healthy caregiving, build a support system, you know, sustain your compassion, things like that. Recognize humor. You know, traumatic events, sometimes you can find humor in them. That's how we deal with stuff in my family, is with humor sometimes. It's not for everybody. There's a ProQual pocket card that I wanted to show you guys because it had some pretty neat little things in there. Just to remind you 10 things to do each day. Are you going to be able to do all these every day? Probably not. You're not always going to be able to get enough sleep or get enough to eat or eat too much, those types of things. So it just kind of gives a little bit of a reminder and a pocket card. It also, you know, says focusing your empathy, you know, leave stuff at work, those types of things. So all of these are resources that are on that website. Let me go back to the others. There's another one on compassion fatigue. It goes over the compassion fatigue basics, understanding it. It's got definitions, just lots of different resources. This also has a self-assessment. So again, like I said, I just recommend really finding one that you can do and you can keep doing to kind of like every month if you want to, or every 6 months to kind of check on how you're doing. This will they can assist you in doing a care plan on this website. It has interviews with professionals, so you know that you're not alone, and links to other resources on there. It's this one is done by EDU Med. And then we have some books. I just chose some books. Like I said, some people like to have that tangible thing. Some of these are higher rated. You can always look on Amazon and find those books. The one I kind of like was this compassion fatigue workbook. I like working on my phone, but there is something about going out on a sunny day when it's nice and just being able to sit outside and enjoy nature and maybe working through this compassion fatigue workbook, things like that. So all these books will be listed on there as well. So I am going to stop screen sharing and leave it open for any type of questions for Allison and myself.
Thank you, Christy Bartlett. We'll give a few more minutes for any questions for Christy or Allison to answer. I just want to kind of add also that, you know, you can find other resources on our regional website, the panhandlementalhealthguide.org as well. And we'll try and upload the ones that you've also shared today on there as well.